We're going to discuss how to create and utilize APA documentation. Now, this just goes from making the references, which would be at the end of your paper, and also how to do the in-text citations, which go inside the writing of your paper. And to do that, I have some guides that are available for you that I want to go over and just explain in case anything is unclear. So first of all, when you're doing the APA documentation versus the MLA documentation, it does emphasize different parts of the source, and APA is used primarily for science-based courses or content. So if you're going into an AS degree, for instance, to get started, an associate's in science, then you're probably going to be using APA pretty frequently, especially once you get into your bachelor's program. All students have to know both types, MLA and APA, and typically, at least in my opinion, it's easier to learn APA once you've already experienced MLA, which has fewer rules that go along with it. APA also has a lot of rules that go in with the document formatting, and that's something that I'll point out in a different video. So for now, we're just talking about the actual documentation citation stuff. Now, first of all, if you are using the database, let me just remind you that databases do give you documentation. So if you are in the database and searching for a source, when you go into that source in order to access it, there's a citation function, and you just want to make sure that the APA version is selected instead of the MLA one. So for the APA one here, you'll be able to copy, for instance, the documentation that's made for you from the database. And even if I go to the MLA one, actually the ninth edition, you can already see that there may be some differences. Like you notice the first name appears here in the MLA, but in the APA, it's just initials. The year is also here in parentheses. And a lot of people are pretty familiar, or at least perhaps know a little bit about APA, and they know that the year is something that they're supposed to put into your documentation. Again, that's only for APA though. So keep in mind, MLA and APA do have some differences, but the database helps you out, at least with this part, which would go on the references page. Now, for other things such as websites, how to do those in APA, and also how to do your in-text citations when you're writing out your sentences and you need to document it at the end so you don't plagiarize, I have some various notes for you. So if you go into the course content and look for the research notes folder, inside that folder, along with these instructional videos, is the MLA and the APA notes. So the APA notes, here we have everything kind of parsed out into a PowerPoint if you want to just look at it section at a time. The APA 7th edition is the full version of different source types. For instance, if you're trying to do a whole book, like your textbook for a class, how would you document that in APA? You follow the format, and then an example follows. Okay. And they have this for all the different types, like an article from a website without an author, and how those are handled. Now, because it doesn't fully go into detail about how to handle authors, and sometimes that part's a little confusing, I have a different version of notes that are also available. So let me go back one page. So the APA 7th edition is for the references page. Based on the format or the type of source you're using, you follow the format. This second link, the in-text citations link, does these in-text citations, which would go after your writing. And again, these might be a little confusing, so I'm going to explain those. But here's the official guide. And then if we go back to those APA notes again, I want to take you down to, aside from, here's another document that shows examples of how to quote, how to paraphrase, and then also a sample paper. But these are my kind of simplified notes, this APA document notes 7th edition that I typed out with some examples for you. So this is for specifically a website, and then how to do the in-text citations for it, since aside from the database, a lot of you are probably using websites if you're allowed to by your instructor for that course or that assignment, keep that in mind. And also if that website is considered an expert source. Now, in the previous video about research, I talked about how to look at websites and determine, is it expert? Is it not? Should you use it? Should you not? And if you need to review that about how to determine if a website should be used at all, then you want to look for the video about how to find expert sources. It goes through the database and also through websites and how to determine if they are usable for your college course. But presuming we have good websites, that we're using, we then need to know how to document them. Okay? So what we'll do is just kind of discuss this document together. I'm going to make it just a little bit smaller. There we go. And I've sorted this by author. Now, APA has changed since the last edition a little bit when it comes to treating authors. And again, this is going to go on the references page, which is at the bottom of your entire paper. In MLA, they call that the works cited. This one we're calling references. Now, if you have one author in APA, the first thing you need to do is present the last name of that author with a comma and then their first initial, not the full first name. Like in MLA, we're just doing first initials for first names, and that's for all of APA, no matter how many authors there are. So for instance, I have this one started, Smith, comma, J is the author. The next thing that goes there after that period, and do make sure your punctuation is correct, that you have the year of the source in parentheses followed by a period. So for instance, here I have in parentheses the year 2018, which is when this article was written. Then comes the title of the article in lowercase letters except for proper nouns. So in other words, everything will be lowercase. For instance, normally in proper type in MLA, we would capitalize red tide. But in this case, we're going lowercase with everything except that first word. And then if it's a proper noun like Tampa Bay, we'll capitalize those. But everything else will be lowercase for APA, followed by a period. And then the name of the website, okay, or magazine if it's a periodical, and that'll be in italics. So that would be, in this case, the website is Bay Soundings, is the name of that website, followed by a period. And then you write retrieve from, and then present the URL with a period. Now, one of the nice things about APA is that they just use periods in this documentation, whereas in MLA, they would put commas, for instance, after the name of the website. So it's really nice and consistent. You're just putting a period at the end of pretty much everything. But you do have to check each individual form just in case, right, for any outside or oddities. So in the end, for this website, we have here the last name, first name, year. The name of the article I read was dealing with red tide in Tampa Bay that came off the website name Bay Soundings, and I got that from this URL. Now, the thing to remember about APA is that it's always better if you're writing an APA paper to put stuff in your own words. And the reason is because there's a difference in the citation after your sentences, whether you quote or paraphrase. Because in APA, if you do a direct word-for-word quote, you need to provide the name of the author, comma, the year of publication, comma, and then either a page number or paragraph number. So if there were actual pages in that book, I would put P period 17, like page 17. Or if there are no pages like on this website, I have to count the paragraphs and then provide the exact paragraph number where this word for word quote comes from that I took off the website and wrote it exactly as it was directly into my paper. So when you do a quote in APA, you actually have to give the location of that word for word quote. But if you rephrase it into your own words, you don't have to give a location anymore. It's just the last name and the year. So always paraphrase anyway in your research papers. The more writing that is in your own words is the more writing for your teacher to grade. But if you put too many quotes in your paper, that's going to bring your paper grades down because now you're not writing your paper, you're copying stuff and putting it into your paper. So your own words is always best, unless it's something you can't rephrase because let's say it's a bunch of statistics, in which case you definitely should quote that, and then you have to provide the location if you're doing an APA style. So that's for one author. Now, if we're doing two authors, then we're going to add the second author. We want to represent it. In MLA, you would write the word and, A-N-D, but in this one for APA, you're doing the last name, comma, first initial period, comma, and then this ampersand, the and sign, and then the second author is going to be last name, comma, first initial again. In MLA, they would change that to first and last name, but APA is nice and consistent that way. It's always just last name, comma, first initial, and last name, comma, first initial. Then the rest of the format that follows, like we already discussed up here. When you do the quote and you're doing your citation, you would put last name and last name, comma, year, and then if it's a quote, you got to give a location. If you put in your own words, it's just last name, ampersand, last name, comma, year, and you're done. Now, if you have more than 2 authors, you have to list all of them on your references page, and that goes for up to 20 total names. You might think, there's no way a document could have 20 authors on it, but actually, that can happen, especially in a sciences paper, because in the database, you have these really long scientific reports or case studies that were done by teams of doctors, for instance, that were all working on the same case. And as with good science, you need a large enough population to study. So you can't just do a paper about bullying and only survey 10 students. Those 10 students are not enough to account for or represent all the bullying that happens in Florida in the 4th grade. We're going to have to interview thousands of students in order to get that kind of data. And to do that, you're going to need more than one person working on the case study. You're going to need a huge team of doctors who are interviewing hundreds of students all over the place to get that data so that it's sound. And so in that case, yeah, you can definitely have 20 or more people on a report. And if you've got 20 authors, I'm sorry, but you have to list all of them on the references page. Last name, comma, first initial period, comma. Last name, comma, first initial period, comma. All the way up to 20. If there's more than 20, you would actually do the first 19, you would do ellipses, the dot, 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 and then the very last person on the list, number 30. If there's more than 20, it would be 19, dot, 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 and the last one. Hopefully, your documents won't have that many authors, but if they do, you need to know how to treat them. So let's say, for instance, this one had more than 2. It actually ended up being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 authors exactly on the document. So we have to list all 5. And we would list the first 4, all last name, comma, first initial period, comma, the next one, etc. And when we get to number 5, we'll put the ampersand in front of it. And then the very last one, number 5. And then the rest of the format follows. Now, if you're doing an in-text citation, though, for any source that has more than 2 authors, you don't have to list all of them in the in-text citation because that would make your paragraphs huge, especially if there's 20 or more. So with the in-text citation, you get a break, but you got to remember to do this, that when you do the in-text citation and it's more than 2, you're going to go with the et al. That was also true in MLA. MLA did this as well. If it was more than 2 authors, it was 3 or more, you did the first author's last name followed by this ETAL. And so APA also does that with a comma and the year, and if it's a quote, a location. If it's paraphrased, no location, it's just last name et al. 2018 in this case. So that goes over how to treat authors. But what if you have a website with no author, which is pretty common? Doesn't mean it's not an expert source, but you should definitely make sure that it is before you use it. Now, if there's no author, though, you do have to change things up a little bit. In MLA, this part is easier because if there's no author, you just go to the next part and you just keep on going in the exact same order with what comes next in the style. But with APA, you do have to make an adjustment. If there's no author, for instance, in this example, it starts with the author and next is the year, right? So if this were MLA, we would have just skipped this part and started with the year. But in APA, you never start with the year. The year always goes in second place. So that means after we skip the authors, we can't use the year. We're taking then the title of the article, the name of the article we read, and we're putting that first. This is going to jump over the year and start in the first place. The year is going to stay in second place, and everything else is the same. So, in other words, down here, if you have no author, we're starting with the title of the article, and the year, we're going to keep it in second place, but then the rest of this is still going to be in the same order, okay? Name of the website in italics and retrieve from. Those are the same. So if there's no author, you start with the title of the article, you'll pick it from here, plop it down right here in front of the year, put the year, and keep on going. All right. But for the in-text citation, one thing you do have to remember to do is that when you're putting the title because just like with all documentation, when we're making our citations, we start on the left, we work our way in. So the first thing on the left is going to be the title of the article, which means that's going to be in our in-text citation. But remember, you don't have to put the whole article name. Some of them are really long. You should start on the left and you keep on going until you get to the first noun or noun phrase. So dealing is not a noun. With is not a noun. Red is actually a part of red tide. Okay, that's the thing, the object, the noun. Okay, so we could stop there. We don't have to put the rest of the title in there once we hit the first noun or noun phrase. And when we put that inside of documentation, however, because it's not an author, it's a title, we got to put it in quotes in this case. So in MLA, they do make that a little bit easier because in MLA, this would be in quotes here in the documentation. That helps remind you that it goes in quotes down here too, but it's not. In APA, there's no quotes in the references section. So those quotes, you got to remember to add them inside your in-text citation when you're making it. And then if it's a direct quote, you've got your title, comma, year, comma, location. If it's in your own words, title in quotes, comma, year. Now, there are some websites that also don't provide you with the date of publication. So what do? You can't skip the date section in APA. You have to keep it in. But if there is no year, then you'll put this abbreviation, N period D period for no date. And you also have to put it here in the in-text citation too. So we have to represent that no date was found. Now, just a note, and this goes into kind of how to use citations further, how to give credit. Those are for the rules for the in-text citations, just like these, which we put at the end of our sentences. But sometimes students ask or want to actually write the name of the author inside their sentence. So if you want to write your source and credit it inside your sentence, you can still do that. You just do it in a slightly different way. So let's say I'm writing my sentence, and instead of putting Smith, comma, 2018 at the end of it, I want to put Smith's name in the sentence I wrote. Well, one thing to keep in mind is that titles and years or authors and years always stay together. Okay, so if I want to write according to Smith, I then need to follow Smith's name with the year at that point in parentheses, just like this. I can then put a comma. According to Smith, red tide has been increasing in Tampa Bay for the last 10 years. Let's say that's my quote. And so if I put according to Smith, 2018, comma, I can include my quote. If it's a word for word quote, though, we still have to give locations, but you'll put the location at the end of the quote. So we kind of separate this out onto both sides of the quote if we're just writing our source into our sentence. We put the name and year at the front of the quote and the location at the end of the quote. Periods, by the way, always go outside the citation. Now, if I'm paraphrasing it into my own words, though, I don't need the location part. So I could just say, according to Smith, 2018, and put that in my own words. If that Smith article had 20 authors, I would say, according to Smith et al., 2018, comma, and put that into my own words as well. So that's a basic rundown of documentation. Keep in mind that this doesn't cover every APA rule for references and citations. For more on that, like if you have something that's not a website, let's say you're trying to document a video or something unique, then you want to go to the guide and look for that style. And if that style isn't on there, again, this is not the entire guide, but this is just the most common types of sources that students typically use for college papers. If you're using something outside of this, you can always ask your instructor or a tutor for help. And then if you want more on those in-text citations, something I maybe didn't cover, you can find the more developed document here. But this gets you through most of your stuff for college papers. And always feel free to ask questions. I'd be happy to help you anytime.